Welcome as you come into the room. We'll give some time for others to log on. So give us about 1 to 2 minutes to allow participants to enter the space. Welcome all to our final session of our CENT 2020 virtual seminar. I hope that the time that you have been able to be a part of seminars as well as our opening sessions have been enriching to your work, enriching to your imagination as you think about new possibilities, as you think about perhaps that idea, that venture that's within you that you are uh, thinking through. I hope that you're also finding a community in this virtual space using Blackboard to interact, even maybe have brain dates with those who are uh, gathered for CENT 2020. So I am thrilled. Last year, I had the opportunity to have my first CENT seminar. Of course, it was in person, uh, but even in this virtual space, I'm happy to be able to welcome Reverend Dr. Dietra Wise Baker, who is a activist, who is a social justice seeker and doer, who brings quite a fire to the space of seminar space. So if you're looking to just kind of sit back and maybe, let her lecture and you sit back, that's not what's going to happen here, because this work is work that should be done communal, and we must engage with our minds, our hearts, our ideas, and I know she will lead us through this process in a way that will be enriching to us all. So you've read her bio. She may share more about her and her work in the world. If not, we will jump right into things, and we welcome and appreciate Reverend Dietra Wise Baker sharing with us today about advocacy and activism. And I believe there's a subtitle as well. It's Defund. I'll let her give us a subtitle.
Defund the nonprofit. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about defunding the nonprofit. Thanks, Darnell. Thank you, NBA, always for the support and opportunities to engage with folks. I know the style of the webinars have been different. It will help me if you're able to share your camera and your face so I can interact. I see Mady. If you're able, that will help me to be able to interact with you. That's more my style than sort of like just lecturing and sort of talking. We do have things we have things we have to interact about. So look forward to interacting with you all. I want to take a minute and I want to get a sense of who's in the room. That always helps me. Since it's small enough, I have a little bit of time. If a couple of you would be willing to, if we could just take a minute and go around, just get a sense of, just tell me who you are and why you picked this. Why did you pick this? Maybe in a sentence or two, to keep it short, so we can press, and then we'll start our conversation today. So I see Mady first, so I'm gonna start with Mady. If you just share, your name and why did you pick this track?
So I'm Maddie McCollum. I am living in Charlotte, North Carolina. I am a former Explore More resident of the Disciples Church, and so I have been interested in community organizing. I'm staying actually in my Explore More placement for a while longer to do more organizing with that organization. And I had met Dietra before when we were going to do the Gamaliel training, but then COVID happened. So I'm excited to hear more and continue the conversation. Looking forward to everybody else.
Thanks, and sorry for, I always say Maddie, and it's Maddie. I always do that to you. Ben, I see Ben.
I'm Ben Moore. I'm a pastor at Fort Lewis Christian Church in Salem, Virginia. Recognizing the need for the church and for Christians to engage better with the community and with justice work, and so that's why I'm here.
Awesome, thank you, Ben. Yason? I'm not sure if that's the correct pronunciation.
Yason.
Yes, Kyusan. My name is Kyusan Min. I'm senior pastor working on Water Christian Church. I'm serving people with autism and developmental disability. So advocacy is my always big issue. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Lauren?
Hi, I'll try to be quick because I have kids in the background making noise. I'm a new church pastor of Mission Gathering Christian Church in Thornton, Colorado. And I think with COVID, the complete disruption of church as we know it, I think going back, there's no going back, and I'm really interested in what the future looks like. And to me, I'm hopeful of a future that is more centered around outside the four walls of the church, and activism and engagement being a key part of that.
Awesome, great, thank you so much. Latanya?
I'm Latanya Bynum. I'm the regional minister for the Christian Church of Northern California, Nevada. And I'm really here to learn and to listen, and so that I can encourage congregations. We have pastors asking kind of what can we do? What are the limits of activism and advocacy in the church, and particularly in a congregation, as someone described earlier, that's evenly divided in terms of political persuasion or how that's expressed. The church should be active, the church should be spiritual, as if those are two different things. And so really just want to listen and learn so that I can share what I glean today.
Awesome, thank you so much. Berzola, I don't know if you can share, or are you just listening? I'm gonna take it that you just listen.
I'm listening for discovery, eavesdropping.
We love you. Welcome. Renee?
Hi, everybody. I am not 100% sure what the question was. I was in the middle of a school assignment.
No problem. Understand. Just who your name is and why you picked this track. And you're the last one, so you're fine.
Okay, I'm Renee Earle, and I am from Northern California, Nevada region. And I'm finishing up my last year in seminary, and I have real hopes of starting a recovery and resource center for women who have been previously sex trafficked. And I've also have the real hope that I can open a new church start that is 12-step geared. So there's all kinds of stuff that I have excitement around, and I know that I can learn something really wonderful from you. So that is why I'm here.
Thank you so much for that vote of confidence, Renee, and welcome. So the conversation we're about to have is not an easy conversation. Let me say it that way. And I try to always be direct about that. So that's to warn you that you may not always be comfortable during this conversation, but you have my commitment that I'm with you for the long haul, and that I love the church and the people, and I love the community. So let me give you my opening assumption, an assumption that I'm carrying that you need to know that you may not agree with. And I want to give you room and permission not to agree with my assumption, but it's important that you know it as we engage in this conversation. And so I'm going to say it and I'll put it up in a minute. But I believe that all social issues have roots in social, economic, and political injustice and inequity. So I'll say it one more time and I'll give some examples. I am working with the assumption, I believe this, I really believe that all social issues have roots in social, economic, political injustice and inequity. So what do I mean? So I mean someone that might be caught up in sex trafficking. I believe the roots of sex trafficking are rooted in a social economic inequality. If I'm talking about someone that's dealing with drug and recovery issues, right? I picked that one as one that people might think, oh, that's really personal. That's like really choice driven. That's really about that person and what they decided to do with their life or not do. I'm saying even that kind of social issue, I want to suggest in my assumption that I believe has a root to social, economic, and political inequity and inequality. And so I just want to warm up with that assumption and ask you to put in the chat, I think you all can chat, where are you in your agreement with that assumption, right? Some of you are like, yes, I'm with you 100%. And I promise you're not going to offend me. You're like, I'm going to go with 50 with you or 25. Just put in the chat, like, how strongly, you can hear how strongly I feel that. You may not feel it that strongly, but give me a percentage. I'm 25% there, Reverend Dietra. I'm 50, 75. No, it rings true to me. That seems about right. Someone said that, because this is important as we have this conversation about defunding the nonprofit, about activism and advocacy and defunding the nonprofit, that we makes explicit this kind of assumption and where we are with this kind of assumption. Does that make sense? All right. So I'm gonna share my slides, and I'm gonna invite us into a little bit of a activity for a second, and it may be one that you've seen before or heard before. Let me just move you all over here. I want you to think about, in terms of this conversation, one change. Can you all see my slide? I didn't want to make sure. Can you see that? Name one change in the public square that could make your organization unnecessary. So whether it be a church or a nonprofit social service sector type of ministry or organization or agency, I want you to think about one change in the public square that can make your organization unnecessary. Because the conversation that I'm about to have with you is basically asking you to build a plan or to think strategically about ending the necessity of your organization. What would have to change in the world? What would have to change in the public square for your work, your ministry, your agency to no longer be necessary? So I want you to think about that, and I'm going to give you an example of myself. So I do lots of things. I'm a professor at Eden Seminary. I teach preaching and faith-based community organizing. I'm a contextual ed director and place students in community placements to merge their learning with their community work. But I'm also a faith-based community organizer, and I work on a campaign called Break the Pipeline. And Break the Pipeline is a campaign to end the criminalization of Black youth in education, policing, and in the juvenile justice court system. And one change, so this is how I would answer this. One change in the public square that would cut down 30% of my work is if we had equitable education with equitable outcomes. If we had a school system, a public education system that could produce equitable outcomes, my work as an organizer in the school to prison pipeline around education, I would be finished. If that change could happen in the public square, I could stop doing that organizing work. So I want to open it up for a second. I just want to put that question. I'll come back to the slides in a minute. And I want to hear from a couple of you if you have formed sort of a clear place where if this change happened, I wouldn't have to do my ministry anymore. You can just unmute yourself and talk back to me, and you're also welcome to put it in the chat. What do you think? I'd love to hear a couple. There are a couple of you. Do you have a clear sense of, wow, if this change happened in the public square, this could possibly cut down on my work or in my agency or organization altogether?
I'd say one of the central focuses in my church is LGBTQ inclusion and affirmation. So if all churches included those type of people, that'd kind of be my big thing gone.
Thank you. It's awesome. Very clear.
I'd say equitable housing and food security.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really clear, Ben, right? Man, that would end a lot of our work, right? I mean, a lot of the churches, I don't know a church that doesn't, especially right now, that doesn't have a food ministry, a feeding ministry of some kind. I saw maybe there's maybe one more person, and then I'll show you a framework that you've probably seen, but we'll just re-emphasize it to make sure we're on the same page. Okay. Is that question making sense? Great. Okay. Go back to my slide. So I think you all have probably had this question asked of you before, but I'm gonna. What did it do? Hold on. I don't know what happened there. Try that again. There we go. I don't know why it's doing that. Try one more time, then I'll just talk to you. Can you guys see my slide? Can you see it? Okay. So the question I want to ask you, can you see this lovely picture? You all probably have heard this scenario before. What would you do if you saw that babies were in the river, right? And as a mother of a 22-month-old, I mean, I can tell you if there's a baby in the river, I'm going to get the baby out the river. Hands down, no problem. I'm going to get the baby out the river, right? I think that's what we all would be compelled to do, and ethically, something that we'd be responsible for. But one of the things that we're trying to shift in our conversation as we think about how do we make our ministries unnecessary, right? Is we have to look upstream and think about who and what is putting babies in the water, right? We can continue to pull the babies out, right? And we need to do that, right? But at some point we have to ask the question, who and what is putting them in, right? If we want to stop what's happening, we have to go upstream. We have to look upstream. So I want to ask you for a minute to think about what is the equivalent of the babies that you are pulling out of the water in your ministry, right? What is the crisis? What is the emergency? What is the immediate sort of need and task that you have to attend to or are attending to in the mission or the work of your agencies, your organizations, right? What is that immediate task? And to begin to think about what is upstream. So let's just take a minute and talk about what are those babies? Who are the babies in your ministry? Who are the babies in your work? What are those immediate crisis needs that are right in front of you that you're taking care of in the agencies and the work that you're doing now? Is this framework making sense to you? Yeah, I know some of you have probably heard it before. But contextualize it for me in terms of your own work and your own agencies.
We're trying to provide emergency food services and like food pantry stuff.
Right. And so let's just talk about that for a second, Maddie. And so let's talk about what do you think might be going on upstream in terms of the issues that even create sort of food insecurity?
Well, there's, economic issues, of course. There's also lack of public transportation. We're in a food desert, so lack of access to fresh produce. So even the food that we do have access to is killing us because it's unhealthy. So that's at least 3 right there.
That's good. That's helpful. So, I tell the story that, sometimes I'll go to the churches, right? The churches that have food ministries, I always would think an obvious campaign in those churches would be campaigns around like Fight for 15, like fighting for minimum wage, like that the church would be like completely on board with a Fight for 15 campaign. And then we get to interacting with the church, and then we realize the church will say something like this. Maybe you've heard it. Well, that's political. That's political stuff, and we don't do that. We don't do that political stuff, but we're going to continue our feeding ministry, for example. And that there wasn't a clear connection to the church in the church about why fighting for 15 is critical to your food ministry. I wouldn't say stop doing your food ministry, because people are coming there every week because they have a need, but can you expend some of that energy and some of your work on the Fight for 15 campaign so that you can stop some people from coming to the food pantry? And it felt like in some places that was a hard victory to win. So I want to ask you all about that tension between
Certainly
service and system.
the church, I mean, every place I've served, most of the childcare workers in the day schools and preschools don't even make the 15. So they wouldn't even know how to, so it's a personal indictment against the church to even try to get in that conversation when they themselves, they're custodians, right? The facility workers and the childcare staff rarely make 15, more like 9 to 13.
I want you to hold on to that example as we talk about sort of defunding the nonprofit and the nonprofit industrial complex, which I believe churches are a part of. And so we have these kinds of tensions because of our membership in the nonprofit industrial complex, because we're going to have to address, right, sort of the same inequities and inequalities that we have in our structures and systems that we're fighting against or for. And sometimes, like you're saying, Verzola, we're not ready to do that. And honestly, sometimes we don't even see it. Like, we don't even see. We don't even see the connection between those two. So I just want to, in this conversation, try to get a sense from you, make sure that you're seeing in your own ministry sort of the babies that you're pulling out of the bathwater, and a look upstream to what's putting them in there in your own ministries, in your own context. Because I think the challenge that Darnell and the NBA are, I'm assuming the reason they keep asking me to have this conversation with the Cent folks is because early in your plans, early in your building, is to begin to include a way to work yourself out of business, right? To begin, while you're doing your social impact work, while you're doing your social entrepreneur work, while you're doing your social service work, to put in your plan, to put in your strategy, something that's upstream, something that stops the babies from being put in the river in the first place. So I want to stop there for a second and see if there's more examples from the context. Is this stirring something new, or this is sort of just a rehearsal of some things that you know?
Yeah,
just seeing if there's.
I think one of the other tensions is that we tend to make these distinctions between kind of who deserves our help and who doesn't. If that childcare worker were better educated, he or she could earn $15 an hour, but they're not, for whatever reason, probably some nefarious choice they made in our minds, and so they don't deserve $15 an hour.
And I would again, Latanya, yeah, lift up that these are also markers, some would say, of the nonprofit industrial complex, right? When we act that way, when we decide who's in and who's out, that's another marker that's what we're a part of.
Right.
And so it's important that we're attentive to these. Thank you for that. Any others? All right. So I think we got this down. I'm just gonna show a video, this clip from Black Panther. All I'm trying to do is just to make sure that this is in your body. That's all. That this conversation is in your body. And for me, this is a short conversation that happened in Black Panther that crystallized this idea for me, that helped me understand this in my body. And so we're going to show it now.
We should get to them immediately. But though my heart is with you, we cannot turn over our nation to a man who showed up here only hours ago. He is of royal blood. He killed T'Challa in ritual code. Does that really matter? You are the greatest warrior Wakanda has. Help me overthrow him before he becomes too strong. Overthrow. I'm not a spy who can come and go as they so choose. I am loyal to that throne, no matter who sits upon it. What are you loyal to? I loved him. I loved my country too. Then you save your country. No, I save my country.
What's wrong?
The king is dead. Come with me, unless you want to join him.
So again, I think in my body, there's two pieces that are standing out in this conversation: serving and saving. Right? I mean, Okoye, she's loyal to the throne, and she doesn't stop serving, right? Throughout the whole movie, it's not like serving ends up disappearing. But there's a tension between serving and saving, like liberating the people and making sure that they're free. There was a difference between those two that was made clear to me in sort of this argument. I think that same argument and tension is one that we have to have in our churches, in our regions, in our community organizations, right? Because when I was a kid and we were sort of being dragged around from system to system, it wasn't that none of the systems helped us, but none of the systems transformed our situation, right? At the end of the day, yeah, okay, maybe today we had food, but it didn't help us move towards not being poor. It didn't change sort of what the actual struggle of our life was. And so we want to have systems and institutions and organizations that actually transform. So I just want to stop there and just test where you guys are in your body about the serving and the saving, and what might be coming up for you there in your own context in ministries. Renee, I'm just going to pick on you because I mean, I love the ministry that you're doing. So I'm just wondering how this conversation is going for you. I just want to check on you.
You know, I have yet to open this center, and when I talk about it to people and talk about what my goals and my dreams are of doing this in tandem with ministry, you know, from the everyday person, I get a good amount of pushback. There are people who are really supportive within my church context, or people that have mentored me through that really understand where I'm coming from with it. But if I just say it out loud to somebody or in a crowd or with people who say, what are you studying and what's your goal? There's always that, but at the same time, it's kind of like that video. Jesus wasn't there to like follow the crowd. Jesus was there to save the people, and that's the way I look at it. Like, am I going to be the hands and feet of Jesus and do what the right thing is? Or am I going to follow the crowd and just do regular ministry that doesn't even interest me? Because I know there's a calling. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah, you had the ministry that's related to sex trafficking is one of the elements of the ministry that you want to do, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure that the church folks always they're like, huh? What are we doing now?
It's a big subject. It's a big subject.
Yeah, it's a topic or whatever, because of how we have become too a part of that nonprofit industrial complex, and we decide who is worthy, right, of help and who isn't. Sometimes by the dollars that we get, and sometimes by some of the values we've inherited and the caste system that we've inherited in this country. Right. Make those decisions. And so that's why it's sometimes hard for church folks who haven't liberated themselves yet to embrace, this sort of ministry. But I'm wondering about the conversation that we're having about what's putting women in that situation in the first place, Renee, and what do you think about building into some element of your ministry, tapping into some of those root causes that's putting the women in that situation in the first place? What do you think about?
Right, yes. When I was doing research for it, and I don't know if this will answer your question at all either, because I may need to dig a whole lot deeper, which I see I do. But part of what I really would like to do is include things like job skills and, interviewing techniques and where are your passions, and, this is like my goal for the centers is after the initial recovery, after the initial therapy. This is the long-term goal. Like, where are we going to get you? Let's help you with some housing. Let's help you with some, interviewing techniques. What kind of schooling do you need? Because these things were lacking, obviously. And do you need recovery resources, long-term recovery resources? Because a lot have addiction issues, let's be honest,
No, so this is what
those are some core things.
Yeah, that's why I'm talking to you. I'm talking to the right person to make sure that we're clear about the conversation. So, Renee, is that all of those things are pulling the babies out of the bathwater. They're important, right? But they're addressing the symptom and not the source of the problem. And there's lots of sources. I mean, I think we could say patriarchy is a problem, women not being paid the same thing that men are paid, right? Why
do men think they can buy women?
Yes, right. The demand for this issue, right, is a problem. How we're raising men, and right, all those kinds of things are root issues. And so I'm just trying to get you to think about, as you create sort of the reentry resources and the social service ministry related to these women, that you begin to do some research and begin to think about how are they getting put in this situation in the first place, and how can I add in my ministry plan a plan to address or to advocate around one of those root issues, one of those system issues. Does that help everybody get clear about what we're talking about? So let's talk about sort of an internal dynamic that we have to deal with. And I'm gonna skip to it, called the non-profit industrial complex. How many of you have heard that word before, by the way, while I'm sharing my screen? You can put your hand up or whatever. Have you all heard that term? Okay. So I want to show you a definition of racism. Can you all see my screen? Great. I want to show you a definition of racism And then I want to talk about the nonprofit industrial complex real quick and its markers. And then I think we'll end on the buffet, just some ideas about how do you build this into your ministry. So the way that we talk about racism as organizers is that it's race prejudice plus the use of power by systems and institutions. And I highlighted institutions because I don't think sometimes we realize that the power that institutions have is a part of how racism continues to impact communities and how it also infects our agencies and our organizations. And so that is to say that your institution, your agency, your organization, the power that it has and it uses and the resources that it has and uses is important and critical in this work of equity. So I want to give you this, this definition of the nonprofit industrial complex for a minute. It says it's a system of relationships between the state or local federal governments, the owning classes, foundation, nonprofit, social service, and social justice organizations. Right, and this is from the Revolution Will Not Be Funded Beyond the Nonprofit Industrial Complex. So I just want to name some markers for a second and some things we have to think about in our churches and our regions and our agencies. And this work was done by some other researchers, and here's a quote from them. They said, nonprofits inherit their soft control function from the social welfare state, mitigating tensions produced under capitalism. I'm gonna say to you, like I would say it if I was sitting around talking to my homegirls, that nonprofits were created to appease white guilt. Remember I told you at some point this conversation would probably get uncomfortable? The ruling class, the owning class in the caste system of our country, white slave holding owners and the generations that inherited that wealth. There's a whole group of folks as social unrest increased social organizations and responses to appease sort of what was happening socially, politically, and economically. So we sort of die that down by creating sort of a nonprofit social service complex to fill in the gaps, to not deal with so that people will just keep taking the babies out of the water. They don't ever deal with who and what is putting them in. Many of the nonprofits, including I would say the NBA, have its roots in this soft control function from the social welfare state. With funding and restrictions, a social service model of targeting constituents, nonprofit may do the work of the state, keeping in place state-sponsored supportive forms of inequality and disenfranchisement. Well, Tanya already said it. Some of you already said it. Who do we serve? Who we can't serve? Who's valuable to serve? All of that is part of the markers of the non-industrial complex. And so the call that I'm giving to you all today and that we're having a conversation about is a call to develop movements in terms of the money that are funded, and I would say that are led by people who are impacted by the issues that you all are working on. Because if that is not at the center of what you're doing, we're going to reproduce in our work, in our service, this inherited role, which is control and appeasement. All right, that was hard. All right, let's talk. I don't want us to reproduce. That's why I'm saying defund the nonprofit. I don't want us to reproduce a system, honestly, that was created to socially control the masses that have been impacted by these issues and appease them by giving me something to eat instead of making sure I can have access to the equitable job, right? Giving me clothes, right? Because I was one of those kids. Why do we have to take that? Like, I want us to be able to go to the store with our own money, right? That was the questions I don't want no food stamps. I want you to have your own money, mommy. How come we can't work on that, right? And so that's the tension in the conversation that we have to have, is that if we're not intentional, we will reproduce racism, and we will reproduce this non-industrial profit, this non-profit industrial complex with these markers in it. So let me stop there for a second and let me hear from some of you all about how you're digesting this. And then we'll talk about next steps and open it up for some questions and some more conversation.
Can I ask about a question about this? So like in terms of fundraising, like in a traditional model, I mean, it feels like, hey, rich white people, give us the money that you stole so that we can do what should have already been done. So like, I'm trying to like figure out in my head, I'm working on a project, like how do I decolonize the fundraising process?
It's awesome. It's an awesome question. So I think I heard someone talk about this earlier on one of the webinars. I think there's two fronts. One, we would say that, you know, nonprofits need to begin to organize their fundraising around the actual base that's impacted, right? That base not may have like a lot of money, so you're gonna have to organize a lot of people in that base. I mean, I think relatively somebody would say that's what Obama did. He's from my faith-based organizing tradition, right? So he organized people and money and built power by getting little bits of money from lots of people, right? And so that the base owns the work and is accountable for the work. One of the ways that the non-industrial complex has creeped into nonprofits is that, okay, you might have the program people who look like the people from the community, but the purse strings are controlled by the foundation who don't look like anybody from the community, and they get to dictate what you do based on what they put in the grant and what you can't do. Right? And so there's a lot of control that's happening through, you know, the funds that are getting. And so one of the examples that I was given earlier is that, what about, you know, something like reparations, you know, we would call a defund and divestment, right? Giving, someone was saying that they went to Princeton has $1 billion endowment. Why don't you set $100 million aside, giving it to Black entrepreneurs that, let's say, came from your university, and making that a part of their investment portfolio? Like that kind of move from those who have control of those funds, those foundations and those monies, those kinds of moves where it's not just, let me grant you some money, but I control the strings. But let me give you money that you now own, that you now have control over, that you now are the decision maker of, right? Resources without the strings attached is what we need. What we're talking about in the community is actually the transfer. You know, this is what we mean by defund the police. This is what we mean by defund the nonprofit, is the transfer of those resources and that infrastructure so that it's community owned and community operated, like, period, end of story. That's where this train is headed from a community point of view in many cases. So I hope that answers like some of the questions that you're thinking about. It got to be funded from the base of people that are impacted, you know, which means the organizations that we're serving in has to have a relationship with the people that were impacted. You can't have a transactional, I just feed you and then y'all go back. We don't have a relationship. We're not building power. We're not trying to change anything that's actually impacting you. We're just feeding you. We have to take it past that. And those that do have resources have to let those resources go, and the power that they have to control those resources over to the communities that they say they want to be empowered and to be transformed. I told y'all this was gonna be hard. Come on, somebody else, thank you. This nonprofit industrial complex is the thing.
Dietra, I have a friend who says to her little boy when he gets frustrated, you can do hard things. Mm-hmm. And I think this is hard, and I think we can do it, but it means kind of thinking in different ways. And so it means not saying to Renee, who is an emerging minister in my region, and we are blessed to have her, and I want to say that in this forum, not why are you serving those people, but how can we support you as you work with that population of people? and see their needs and hear their stories, and help the church be present in those communities of need. And systems are hard to break down. Systems resist change, and as you're calling for this kind of really systemic change, that's incredibly hard work, and it's exhausting.
Yes, it is.
And the resistance is strong. We see that every day when we turn on the news. That people will do just about anything, act in ways that leave us kind of shaking our heads and yelling at the television to maintain the power that they have.
Which leads us to a perfect conversation that probably is a good place to sort of end and then pivot sort of to next step, is about power. Church folks and social service types are uncomfortable and uneasy about power. We have reasons that we are. Generally because of the ways that it's been used against us. Generally, we've experienced, particularly those in the lower part of the caste system of this country, have experienced the abuse of power, right? So we generally are just not feeling it. We don't think it's a good thing. But we have to move towards neutrality to understanding power. I just want to show you a definition of power, and I just want to, I wasn't sure I was going to talk about this. It just depended, how our conversation went. But I want to show you a couple of things about the kind of power that we have to build, LaTanya, in order to make the kind of changes that I'm talking about that's going to put nonprofits out of business. That's not easy, but it has to be done. And so when we're talking about in organizing, we just say simply power is the ability to act. Sort of all our residue about power gets in the way of us being able to make claims upon power. So we say power is the ability to act, to control, create, or, as you have named, prevent change. We are able to demonstrate and see power very clearly by how many people organized and how much money is organized. That's how we define it very flatly and very clearly in our organizing world. And I want to show you all this work from USC's Program for Environmental and Regional Equity. I don't know if you all have heard of Manuel Pastor. He's an economist at USC, and we call him a community organizer, but they came up with this framework for progressive governance. And one of the things that they talk about are all the arenas, all the places that we have to demonstrate and build power in order for us to have the kind of changes that we're talking about today, right? So, everybody's talking about, electoral power and voting power right now, and that is important and critical, right? But we all know that if we don't have legislative power, right, you can have all the electoral power you want, but if you don't have the right leaders in place, you're going to have some issues getting to your vision. And it's not only the legislators, right? The judges, right? And the folks that shape the kind of policy and kind of governance that we're going to have in our country. Administrative, communications and media and narrative, right? Corporate. Right, these are all arenas where we have to build and demonstrate our power, and we can't be afraid to build the collective power that's needed. Not to stomp on anybody's necks like we've been stomped on, but to build the power to change and shape the communities that we want to see and that we want to build. So I'll leave with this, this a little bit of a buffet. This is a longer presentation, but to get back to sort of this rough conversation about activism and advocacy, activism is us standing up and saying that our rights have been violated. It's us standing at the bottom of the river and saying, y'all are throwing babies in the water. And I can see who and what is doing it. That's what activism is. It brings attention and awareness to the fact that the babies are being thrown in and who and what is doing it. It doesn't necessarily do anything about that. It names it and makes the community aware of it, right? The police are killing people who are unarmed, right? So we bring attention to that, but it doesn't necessarily mean we do anything about that. But that is a part, right, of us beginning to work on that system or that structure. Then there's advocacy. Advocacy really depends upon the power of people generally outside of the community, but it can be helpful if those people are aligned with the values of the community. If you have a politician or you have leadership that's aligned with the values of the community, and you go to them and say, this is what we want you to implement, and this is what we want you to do, and they do that, that's awesome. That's we advocate and they do it, that's great. But sometimes, as you know, we have leaders in place that do not align with necessarily the values of the community. And so it's very important for us to organize, which is to build the power of the constituents in the community, those particularly who are most impacted by the issues that we are serving and working on. And when we build the power of those folks in all those arenas, we will have the opportunity to see the world that will put our nonprofits out of business, i.e. defund the nonprofit. So I will stop there and open it up for questions, comments, and more thoughts for our last, I think, 5 minutes or so.
You said the whole thing right there. Y'all are throwing babies in the water and I can see who's doing it. Bam, like that, that's it. Thank you. Thank you. I have a lot of work to do, but I am just like super grateful.
No, I'm excited, Renee, for your work, and particularly for the women, right, who generally, you know, they can tell you who's throwing them in, and they can tell you what they can tell you what needs to change and who's throwing them in and what the obstacles are. You know, they can write the campaign. They can lead us where we need to go upstream. And so that's why in our ministries, we have to make sure that we have relationship and proximity to the people that we're serving and that we're trying to help and empower them to organize so they can tear down what's throwing them in the first place. So that's good. Other thoughts, comments? Ben, you've been quiet.
I was going to say, one thing you really clarified for me is the way nonprofits and churches in particular are being used by the system of capitalism to further inequity. As you know, over the last 10 years, as the wealthiest have grown wealthier and the poor have not seen any growth, if anything, it's been negative growth. Nonprofits have been there to make sure there's no uprising of the poor. And, you know, the idea that the church has suppressed the need for that kind of revolution it's eye-opening. It's a little discouraging for a second, but it's an absolutely necessary realization. So just thank you for that.
Yeah, you know, shout out to the work of those, you know, who've been working on the non-industrial profit complex for a while. Yeah, it's their work. I'm just sharing it.
I just want to lift up something that's been sitting with me like this whole time, is if we don't tear these systems down, our work pulling the babies out just gets harder and harder and harder. Just get more and more babies in the river. And that's all I'm thinking about is my fellow volunteers at like our suicide prevention hotline. Like every year the call volume goes up. Yeah. Every year we burn out more volunteers and it's harder to sit there and answer the phone. And then when I'm done with the phone, sometimes I just scream into the void because it's like, I want to rip apart everything that made that person call today. So that's what this is bringing up for me. So sorry that it may come from a hard place, but that's where I'm at.
No, it's an awesome example of, you know, what I'm trying to make sure we get in our bodies as we leave this conversation, is that we have to look upstream. And I don't know that it's easier to do the service work. I don't experience it that way. So I don't think that it's easier, and it's sure ain't easy to do the structural systemic stuff. I can tell you that from experience. But the invitation here is that we have to do both. And if we don't, I don't know how long we're gonna last, sort of as you're naming, Amanda, pulling babies out. I don't know about anybody else's community, but my community is tired. We're tired. We need some real changes soon.
I think
And I
one
would
thing I
add,
see. Oh,
wait,
go
Ben.
ahead, Darnell.
I would just add, as a somewhat of a plug, but also the plug for those who may be applying for the CENT 2021 cohort, but even beyond that, that people of faith have a growing edge when it comes to understanding systems analysis, right? And if we are to do this work well, we must be able to tell the story of the why things are the way they are. And it's not a judgment, it's just an observation. I continue to be amazed, even for my social entrepreneurs that I've worked with so far, doing great work, doing impactful work, but cannot trace the upstream. They cannot do it. They passionate fervor, but cannot trace upstream. And if we continue that, I fear that we are not moving toward that God's economy that we talked about yesterday with Patrick Duke, and we're rather sustaining the global economy that exists right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Amen.
Yeah, Darnell, I think both of us sit in a position to be impacting church culture at the very beginnings of churches and organizations. And all of this is just making me wonder what our role is in infusing this new way of thinking, this new way of being into the origin of church and the origin of organized religion. And so that's really kind of, I'm trying to do it in a way that doesn't systematize it or, anything like that, but that's where I'm left. Like, how do I infuse this? It seems like there's so much to chip away because so many people think they're doing it right. You know what I mean? So then how do we show them that and then infuse this new thing? I don't have an answer. It's just a huge question that's going to keep me awake now. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, that's good. No, I'm glad. I'm glad. I don't know, I don't know either. I pick my lane and my people. I build with formerly incarcerated people and incarcerated youth and their families, and that's my lane, in every arena of power that I can help them build power in and organize with them to build power, to tear down the criminal justice system that criminalizes them in school and policing and in the juvenile courts. That's what I'm on. And I think we all have to find that, suited in the, and that came from being a chaplain, as a chaplain with kids that were, and I'm sitting there going, I'm just walking these kids from, I'm doing Bible study and I'm doing worship. And then I'm just walking these kids over from the juvenile detention center over to the prison. And after 15 years of doing that, God was like, girl, you gonna keep on praying for them kids over into prison? I'm gonna show you some things. Are we gonna talk about what you're saying? Are you gonna do something about what you're saying? Or are you just gonna keep walking them over to prison? I done waited for 15 years. I thought you would came and talk to me before now. But come on, I know you see what I see. Just let's have a conversation. And that's where the campaign Break the Pipeline ended up partly coming from, is sort of my taking the babies out the bathwater at detention, Oh my God, they're about to certify and about to go to prison, let me help them get ready to spend their life in prison. Literally. This is where I was. Let me help them get their mind right because they about to go do 20 years across the street. Let me help them get themselves together. That's what I was doing. And I said, wait a minute, Jesus, this ain't it. This ain't it. This is important, but I can't keep just praying over these kids and walking them over to the prison. I can't keep doing this. What else is there for me to do? And that's when Jesus directed my gaze upstream. So Brother Darnell, that leaves us with a minute. I think that's our time.
I don't know if we give thanks for this time that you have spent in inviting us to look broadly at the systems at play and how they intersect with the work that we feel most passionate about. We pray that your cup continues to be refilled as you pour so passionately into your presentations. And it's my prayer and hope that you all will continue to do the work. I think Renee said they have a lot of work to do. We all have a lot of work to do. And may we be faithful to that work, and may we take good care of ourselves that we can do the work in a sustainable way. So thank you all for joining us for this session. We have a closing session in about 15 minutes, which will be very brief. I just want to give you all some next steps for our process with Sent Seminar. Thank you all.
God bless everyone.
Thank you so much.
Blessing.